bring in Keith Warriner. He's a professor of food science at the University of Guelph in Ontario. Hey, Keith, good to see you.
Good to see you, Todd.
Okay, what do you think about this study and the takeaways?
Well, I think there's a few levels here. So when we say eating food past its best before date, well, best before has always been a quality metric, and we don't have use by like they have over in Europe. But I suppose what Sylvan was trying to say is that when we purposely eat spoiled food, then the likelihood is we could get ill, because and even that's complicated, because when we think about cheese, yogurt, these are spoiled foods, but just acceptable. But getting to the point about eating visibly spoiled food, and when we think about meat, for example, it smells funny, it's slimy. Well, that's nature's way of telling us that maybe this isn't the best thing to eat, because it's going to have rancid odors, they're going to have aldehyde, maybe a bit of ammonia, something called biogenic amines, which can cause allergic reactions. So I think the watchword is that, yes, you can eat past the best before date, because best before date is that quality optimum, if you want. After that, it keeps going down. But there again, if we purposely eat spoiled food, like rancid meat, like all moldy fruit and things like that, then for sure we could get ill from it.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's always been and continues to be, sort of a big debate about best before dates, Keith. The idea of how accurate are they? There are some people who say, well, in case of most foods, not the ones you mentioned, but in a lot of cases, that best before date is just an arbitrary date. It doesn't necessarily matter. You can eat things far after that, and you're not necessarily going to get sick. Is that correct?
Yeah, more or less. A lot of the foods we encounter have a best before date for the simple reason they have to by law. I think below 90 days. And people say it must be a lot of science goes into the best before date calculation. It isn't. Sometimes it's as simple as, what do you want at the supermarket for a shelf life or a best before date, and that's what it is magically. But there's certain products, like those dry products where nothing grow, they're good for way past the best before date. But then we have those cautious ones, the meat, the eggs, and things like that, where we have to use our senses. And then you have the ones that you should never do, like deli meats, soft cheese, because their shelf life is dependent on the growth of pathogens like Listeria monocytogenes. And I think one of the weaknesses we have here in Canada is that people aren't informed of this. They don't know this sort of three-tier kind of categorization. And if we'd had that, I think we'll probably be safer and more informed.
Yeah, so something like, I don't know, Kraft dinner, Keith. That you can eat that years later, correct?
Exactly. You can literally put that in a fallout shelter and it'll still be good for years and years. But other things, like I say, are more perishable, where we have to be careful. And the point is like, as I mentioned, nature spoils food as an indicator. We've evolved to be adverse to it. But so if you are in doubt of anything, I would definitely avoid it, rather than just save a few cents, because Sylvan's fairly correct, like the healthcare costs outweigh anything. But thinking about it, though, when we eat spoiled food or take a risk with it, I think a lot of these sicknesses are psychological. And it just reminds me of when edible insects came along and you gave people these chips and said, oh, these chips are nice, aren't they? But when you said they're insects, they suddenly felt ill. So I think there's various things, but I think the main point and the most important point is that if it's spoiled and you're doubting it, don't take the risk with it, for sure.
Yeah, the smell test, so to speak. Hey, Keith, good to see you. Appreciate you taking time for CTV News today.